And welcome back to another episode of In Conversation. As of yesterday, the church is now in the season of Lent, the time when we turn our face toward Jerusalem and journey with Jesus toward the cross. And we thought that we would keep that as our focus for these next few weeks of conversations. And to do that, we're going to be using this resource by Paula Gooder called Lentwise, Spiritual Essentials for Real Life. This is actually a Bible study resource, so we'll simply be taking the themes that she offers to help us in our conversations. And the thing we're going to be thinking about together this morning is the idea of finding direction, of using a compass as we go on our journey, hence why we've got one behind us. And she asks this question right at the start of the book that I thought we might just kick off with to help us get going. So she says, if our lives with God are a journey, what are the travel essentials we should not be without? If our lives with God are a journey, what are the travel essentials we should not be without?
There's so many things that you could answer there. There's just so many things you could start with. And I'm always aware that if you're going on a journey or an expedition, particularly a walking expedition, you want to take as few things as possible because you've got to carry it all. And I remember the first Duke of Edinburgh expedition I ever did was in January, February time. Stupid time to go walking. And you can't actually do it in January or February anymore. And I wasn't a particularly good churchgoer or Christian. I hadn't really understood the Christian faith yet. But I remember packing a Bible and taking a Bible with me on my expedition. Didn't open it once, didn't read it once, but I just had this sense that I needed to have it in my bag. So it was dead weight essentially. And so I guess I'm going to say the Bible is an essential, not because you need the Bible to follow Jesus, but having the stories of Jesus around you is probably a helpful thing.
Yeah. I think there's something in that of what you just said, actually, that we should pack the things that we need for the particular journey we're going on. So you use the example of a walking expedition. There are certain essentials that you would use for that you perhaps wouldn't pack in your suitcase to go on a beach holiday, for example.
So your hair straighteners would be useless on a walking expedition.
Which is why you won't find me on a walking expedition. Paula Gooder helps us to think about these essentials, and she offers us 5 different ones that we're going to be talking about over the next few weeks. The first of which, as I mentioned earlier, is compass. Then it's nourishment, light, shelter and water. And we're going to be thinking about those and the particular journeys that she invites us on as we have our conversations. So this morning is really all about the idea of finding direction and using a compass to find where we're going. And we were reflecting this morning actually that perhaps now more than ever we have this this desire, if you like, to know where we're going, to know what's next, and we're often obsessed with that question of, well, what's next? It always feels like once you've kind of ticked something off, you need to move to the next thing, and it certainly feels like that sometimes in the Christian world as well. And it feels like that particularly at the moment with lockdown and with wondering, when we're going to emerge out of that and what that's going to look like. How do you deal with that inner wrestle to trust God for all that he has for us, while equally living in a world that's obsessed with that question of what's next?
Yeah, I suppose if you look at the disciples, they're constantly asking Jesus, when is the Messiah going to come? Or when are you going to die? They're constantly thinking ahead. And every time they ask Jesus these questions, or who are you, for example, that's another question they ask regularly. He constantly, rather than doing big picture, we're going over there, he says, no, look at what's going on now. And I think you've got to hold hold both in tension, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
I guess, was that a phrase at Chester?
Probably.
You kind of got to hold both in tension, in that, yes, you've got to be looking about the kind of the big picture vision, where are we going? But sometimes we get so caught up in going, right, we need to go over there in that particular direction. We forget, actually, Jesus calls us to live now.
Yeah, and I think there's actually something quite hard in that at the moment, isn't there? When actually what's going on now perhaps isn't very life-giving or very joyful. You know, the kind of the hardship and struggle of a third lockdown and of not knowing what life's going to look like post-COVID. It's hard for us, I guess, to stay in that.
So yeah, so I know a lot of churches throughout the country, and I guess a lot of organisations as well, at the beginning of the last decade had Vision 2020, and so they kind of created these visions to say, this is what we want the church to look like in 2020. And I've found this amusing every time I've thought about it, because none of them thought that 2020 would be a year where they'd be locked out of what they did, and it would be a year of pandemic, and so it completely changed. And I think actually, certainly at St Michael's we've got a bit of a vision for where God is taking us, but actually the main vision is about loving Jesus and being loved by Jesus and sharing that love of Jesus with others right now, because we need it right now.
Definitely. And I think something that Paula Gooder mentions in here that's quite interesting is she uses that passage in John 14 that's often used at funerals. I'm sure we've read and preached on it quite a few times lately, but actually in that moment where Jesus says to them, this is where we're going, they don't recognise it. And Thomas says, well, how are we supposed to know the way? And Jesus is like, I'm the way, look at me, I'm right here in front of you. And it's so easy for us to miss that, as you say, as we're constantly striving for the thing that's over there.
Jesus doesn't say, go over there. He says, come here, come and see, rather than go over there. And yes, as organisations, yes, as churches, yes, as charities, we do need to have some sort of bigger picture. But in following Jesus, by investing in the moment, investing in the now, enjoying the moment and enjoying the now. I read an article yesterday, I think she's a famous person, but she said, is it okay if we put off meeting the grandchildren when lockdown finishes? Because actually I've got quite used to being on my own, and I've filled my time with all sorts of things. And to readjust means sacrificing some of those. And I love my grandchildren dearly, but actually I've enjoyed lockdown. And I found that really interesting. But actually Jesus, there are things we can love and enjoy at the moment. And Jesus says, I've come that you might have life in all its fullness. So if we're enjoying the moment and faithfully following Jesus right now, we can leave the big picture stuff to him, and we won't miss it because we're being faithful to him, and he is the compass.
And I think one of the ways in which we can kind of practically do that is actually just going on that journey this Lent. I think so often we're so eager to get to Easter, to celebrate the resurrection, that somehow we don't want to sit in the struggle and the rest of the stuff that the journey of Lent offers us.
Definitely.
So an encouragement to you to kind of sit where you are, and to kind of see that in the kind of season of Lent, if you like, to go on that journey with Jesus. Because yes, we will get to Easter Day, who knows what it will look like, but we will be able to celebrate the resurrection. But actually it's really important for us to almost take one step at a time, and to go on that journey with Jesus toward the cross and beyond to the empty tomb.
Yeah, and I think echoing Lent, echoing the traditional journey of Lent, we've got those two themes. We've got Jesus in the desert, and we've got Jesus on the journey to Jerusalem. And in the desert, there aren't many paths. I mean, I've not been to many deserts, but I don't think there are many paths. So, and even the Old Testament, the people of Israel wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. I guess Jesus would have wandered and would have spent time praying and meditating and seeking God in that dry and arid place. And finding sustenance where it was provided, and finding those challenges of the devil and meeting them. He's not going, right, the devil's going to meet me on day 6 and he's going to meet me over there, and then he's going to meet me on day 32. He takes it day at a time and relies on the Lord a day at a time. And in the journey to Jerusalem, Jesus knows that he's going to end up being crucified at Passover, because he's God, he knows that. But he knows that between the start of the journey to Jerusalem and Passover, there's a particular journey he's got to go on, but there is also conversations and people and activities that need to happen to get him there, because in a way he needs to have done enough of God's work for people to want to kill him. And okay, he might have done enough of that already, but the next 40 days we see some fairly controversial things.
Well, yeah, and we don't actually know if he's done enough of that already, do we? Because it's always assumed that he kind of lives 30 years blissfully, you know, in Nazareth at home with his mum and dad, and then all of a sudden...
Which is not true.
Ministry starts. But that's how it can feel, can't it, sometimes?
Yeah.
I as you were talking, I just wanted to read something Paula Gooder says about that passage from John. She says, like Thomas, many of us want to know where we are going tomorrow or next week. But Jesus continues to remind us that he is the way to the Father, and this is what shapes the direction of our whole life. That whole time that Jesus has in the wilderness is about almost strengthening his relationship with God, so that he knows that he is equipped for the task that lays before him. And that is something about Lent as well, actually, that we need to work on our relationship with God. We need to go deeper with him in order to go on that journey ourselves, and almost to live in the now, in what's going on in our world and in our church.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just sat here reflecting on that statement, Jesus needed to do enough to get people to kill him in 40 days time or 46 days time. And we've just finished celebrating the Incarnation. We've just finished celebrating Christmas. Only a couple of weeks ago we celebrated Candlemas with Jesus' presentation in the temple, and then took our Christmas decorations down. And now it's kind of like, right, we've got to prepare for his death. And so this whole idea of finding direction, if you're not quite sure where you're at with life, or where God is in your life, because the last 12 months have been fairly bumpy. I keep using the word bumpy to describe the last 12 months. Actually, spend some time focusing on Jesus' life. Because he did have a life. Okay, a large period of it we don't have any records of, but he did have a life. He was a human being, and he didn't die as a child. So maybe one of the best things we can do in finding direction and in preparing ourselves for Easter is to spend some time reading and discussing and noticing the accounts of his life that we have before Passover.
It's almost about living the in-between, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think we had a friend who had 4 young children, and I remember one of them, I can't remember how old they weren't very old, but because they thought we literally went from Christmas to Easter and there was nothing in between, because actually that's sometimes how we read it, and that's sometimes how it feels in the church's year, particularly if Easter falls earlier in the calendar. You know, you can literally feel like you've just put your Christmas decorations up and then it's time to eat pancakes and start Lent. And actually, I think there's something really important about that in-between time that perhaps Lent offers us. Not just looking at that in-between time for Jesus, but for ourselves as well, because actually that in-between time is the majority of our lives, really. I know some people kind of talk about that cliche thing of the line between the day we're born and the day we die, and you know, what does that line represent? What is held in that line? But actually, I think there's probably something quite significant in that for us to think about, particularly this Lent, when we don't really want to be living that in-between time. We want to be desperate to get to the joyful celebration of Easter. Actually, just looking at what that in-between time was like for Jesus and asking what that means for us in the here and now. Yeah,
and I suppose the other thing to say on that is, if you're feeling lost, or if you don't know Jesus and you kind of go, I really don't understand what they're talking about, but you keep coming back to listen to it, thank you. for us, Jesus is our compass. We don't necessarily know what each day holds. We don't know what each year holds. As we mentioned the other day, if the diocese were to sell this house, for example, we would be homeless. We don't fear each day. We don't worry about each day, because we trust that the Jesus we worship is also a Jesus who sits beside us, and he points us in the right direction. He doesn't say, right, make it up for yourself, off you go. He says, let's go this way. And sometimes that's really obvious, because he makes it very, very clear. And sometimes it's a little bit more confusing and not necessarily clear, but he's always there, because he says, I will never leave you. In fact, as we will hear getting towards Good Friday, Jesus says, as he's praying to the Father, I have not lost a single person that you gave me, and now I give them back to you. Jesus wants to guide you. He wants to direct you. And all you have to do is say, Jesus, help. And in that instant, he says, I've been here all along, but let's go this way now. And that's the beautiful thing about a compass, the one sat behind me. It always points to the right direction, even when we're stood facing the wrong direction. And so it's really easy to reorientate ourselves, because Jesus says, yeah, you're kind of pointing the wrong way. Let's just turn you around, and this is actually a better direction for you.
Yeah, in Isaiah chapter 30, verse 21, it says, and when you turn to the right or when you turn to the left, your ears shall hear a word behind you saying, this is the way, walk in it.
Yeah, so even if you're kind of thinking, actually, I've done some really bad things, or I've gone in a wrong direction, or actually this just doesn't feel like the right place for me, don't despair, don't lose heart, because actually all you need to do is turn so many degrees, and Jesus will then say, actually, no, this is the route you need to be going on.
Definitely. That seems like a good place to stop to me. Feel free to, as always, throw any comments or questions into us.
Oh, can I just say, I'm not intending to do any building projects at St Michael's. Just to allay some fears. I'm quite happy with the building how it is right now.
We were talking more about Stockport, I think, on that one.
Just to calm some fears.
Next week, we're going to be thinking about nourishment and the instruction to just keep going, which I think is a phrase we've definitely used a lot.
So we may use Finding Nemo as an illustration.
So join us for that next week. Hope this has been helpful. As always, throw anything in that you want to ask us about or talk about in relation to what we've talked about today. But do join us again next week.
Have a good Lent.